Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Oregon Sea Grant's Careers in Science Investigation webinar. This is the 9th of a series of webinars that we've been doing since April to connect students like yourselves that are interested in careers in marine science with professionals in the field. My name is Lindsay Carroll, and I am Oregon Sea Grant's Marine Education Coordinator, and I traditionally coordinate classes and programs out of Oregon State University's Hatfield Marine Science Center.
Lindsay.
Hatfield is unfortunately still closed right now, which is why we are very excited to continue to give you opportunities like this virtually. Before we get started, I want to orient you to your screen. We will be using the question and answer function to ask questions of our presenters at any time during their presentation. You may find the question and answer box labeled Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We also would like to get to know a little bit about you. So we have 3 poll questions that we would like to launch. Our first poll question is going to ask you to let us know what grade level you are in. So Kate Goodwin, our Special Projects Coordinator, is going to launch that first poll question for you to let us know which grade level you are in. Thank you, Kate. So take a few seconds, select your response.
There are still people who are just logging on, so I'm going to let people take this poll slowly before I share the results to let more people join in.
Sure thing.
All right, let's see what we got.
All right, thanks, Kate. So we have 7% are joining from, or that are in elementary school, 40% in middle school, 20% are in high school, 13% are in college, and 20% are adults. Thank you for sharing which grade level you're in. Our next question is going to ask you to let us know where you're joining us from. So Kate's going to go ahead and launch that poll. Thank you, Kate. Are you joining us from Oregon? Are you joining us from the West Coast, not Oregon? Are you joining from the Central US, East Coast, or possibly outside of the US?
Lots of choices here. Want to make sure you make the right one.
Do you think we have anybody from outside the US, Kate?
I can see everything, but I will share it with you momentarily so you can all see what the answers are.
Oh, I just figured I'd have you guess. All right, thanks, Kate. We have 76% joining from Oregon, 12% are joining from a West Coast state, not Oregon, 12% from the Central US, and we don't have any East Coasters or anyone from outside the US. That's okay. All right, the last question we have is going to ask you to let us know how many of these webinars you've joined so far. So like I said, we've had, this is our 9th, so we've had 8 since April. So is this your first one? Have you attended one, maybe several, or have you attended all 8? I know 2 weeks ago, we had 2 people that have attended all 7. So this will be interesting to see if they're back.
All right, almost everybody has voted here.
Very cool. Thank you for selecting your answers, folks. We have 50% that are joining for the first time. Welcome. We have other webinars, previously recorded ones, on our website that we'll talk more about later. We have 6% that have attended one before. We have 44% that have attended several, but not all. And we don't have anyone today, at least, that has attended all 8. No worries. Okay. Thank you for letting us, giving us a little bit more information about you. We're going to go ahead and transition into our presentations today. This is actually a unique situation. For those of you that have joined in the past, we've had presenters, 2 presenters present for 15 minutes, but this time we have a whole research team that's going to present for longer, and then we'll have whatever time remains for questions, okay? So for those of you that were joining in late, go ahead and use that question and answer function at the bottom of your screen labeled Q&A to type a question to our presenters at any time during their presentation, and we'll get to as many questions as time permits. So without further ado, I want to introduce our team of researchers here. We have Dr. Maureen or Mo Walczak and Paul Walczak. They are from the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at OSU, excuse me. And we also have Dr. Brendan Reilly, who is a postdoctoral scholar from Scripps Institution of Oceanography at UC San Diego, though I should say that he's done his graduate work, or did his graduate work, at the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. So they're gearing up for an upcoming research expedition aboard the RV research vessel Oceanus, and they're here to tell you about what they'll be doing so that you can follow along with their progress in July. So Mo, Brendan, Paul, go ahead, share your screen and begin.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for all coming today. Let's see. So Lindsay, I'm going to take over the screen sharing from you.
Go right ahead.
If I can. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Can you see that okay?
I guess nobody can respond, but
Okay.
Lindsay, do you see it?
Yes.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
So yeah, thanks for being here today. We're gonna talk about well, so actually we're gearing up right now to go out to sea, as Lindsay mentioned, on the Oceanus, which is one of the ships that's a part of the OSU fleet, the Oregon State fleet. And so we're actually calling in so Mo and I are out in the Coast Range right now. We're self-isolating before the cruise to make sure that nobody gets sick while we're on it. And Paul is calling in from the OSU campus where he's getting our coring gear together. So we're actively making this cruise, like doing everything we do to make this cruise happen right now.
This is the first oceanographic expedition on the Oceanus since the COVID situation began. So there's extra levels of preparation that we've never experienced before.
So all three of us, well, let's see, can I get started? There we go. So all three of us are oceanographers, in different ways. And so we thought we'd start by just introducing ourselves and talking about what attracted us to oceanography and marine geology, and what sort of career path we took.
So this is Mo, and I'm not a native Oregonian. I am a native Washingtonian, so I come from the frozen north. If you look at the upper left-hand part of this slide, you can see a picture of me with my mother in the Olympic Mountains and a picture of me and my dad on the beach. I like these photos because now I have two little babies that are about the same age as I was in those pictures. So I grew up right on the ocean, surrounded by the beautiful geology and oceanography that you're also exposed to as Oregonians. It seems like most of the people who have tuned in today are from Oregon, and it's very lucky to be an Oregonian. I went to University of Washington for my undergraduate education, which was my backyard school, similar as OSU for many of you. And then pursued oceanography, stayed on for graduate school. Those two pictures in the lower left-hand are both photographs of me in graduate school. It was sort of a very sleepy 7 years. I spent a lot of time working on ships, learning the tools of my trade, which is paleoclimatology. So I study past climate and past environment, and I have a research emphasis on understanding past climate of the Pacific Northwest, so our own backyard. After finishing my Ph.D. at Oregon State University, I moved to Australia for a few years. That sort of sun-drenched, happy picture of me in the orange shorts is me snorkeling in Australia, and I was pretty happy there. But I married my longtime friend Paul Walczak, who was a coring technician at Oregon State University. So I returned to Oregon State in 2015. I'm now an assistant professor at OSU, and I'm the director of the coring group. So I am my husband's boss, which is it's fun. I know exactly how to get the most work out of him. So yeah, now I am very fortunate to be working in the area that I love, with people that I love, in a department that I love. And I'm also raising a young family. So I have a just turned 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And if you hear any squealing in the background during this webinar, that will be why. They are quarantining with us.
So Paul, Paul's calling him by phone. So Paul, we have your slide up now.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Are you're not staring at my face, are you? I hope not. So I'm from actually, well, I grew up in Oregon. I'm not actually from Oregon, but I've been in Oregon since, oh gosh, I was probably about 4. So I graduated from Neocony High School, which is on the Oregon coast, sort of directly west of Portland. Manzanita, Rockaway Beach, Cannon Beach area, sort of in that zone, for those of you that don't know where it is. I did my undergrad at Oregon State, and as you guys can see that, and as part of my undergrad I did the sea semester. This is where you sail around on the sailboat that you can see there in the picture. That was the one I was on, so that was a good opportunity. I also went to grad school here at Oregon State, and right out of grad school I just kind of started doing some cruises and ended up becoming a technician, and through some interesting twists and turns, I'm one of the last people in my age bracket that actually know and have done a lot of, really been trained or sort of apprenticed as to how to take large scale sediment cores from the ocean. And, we're trying to get another generation of people trained up, but there's been a little bit of a retirement happening, hiring gap problem. So you can see me there in the upper left-hand corner. That's with Ron Wyden back when he was a young man. We did something called the National Ocean Science Bowl, and that picture was taken with him in Washington, D.C. I've also been lucky enough to go down on the Alvin. So that's a picture of the Alvin and the Woods Hole support ship for it, the Atlantis. That was one of my actual very first cruises. There's me and the little guy visiting Australia with Maureen. I've gone, almost to the North Pole. That's what that picture there is of the 2 icebreakers. We did a photo shoot. You can see me in the hot tub, but unfortunately in the bottom right-hand corner, you can also see our coring device hanging there, and I'm the only person working, dealing with that coring device while everybody else is sitting in the hot tub looking on. So,
Only life.
Yeah, it's a hard life, but so yeah, there's some work pictures in there. So we get around, and actually the center picture there is Dutch Harbor, which is a port that actually we sail out of a lot because the Bering Sea has been a pretty popular place to work in the last decade. A lot of changes are really happening there, and it's an important, economical place for fisheries, and so we've done, food chain studies and that sort of thing there. So that's what Dutch Harbor looks like on a nice day. So that's a little bit about me, and I basically do a lot of the sort of nitty-gritty logistics of getting these trips together, getting all the equipment, make sure it's the right stuff, make sure everything fits together, and make sure it gets to the boat, gets loaded on the boat in the right spot, and is as useful as it can be without having too much of a fight to make it work. So I think that's about all I got for an introduction.
Well, thanks, Paul. And then, so as the last one, so I'm Brennan Reilly. I'm the only one of this group from the East Coast. I grew up in northern New Jersey. I did my undergraduate at Boston College, and then after that I went and did a couple years with the AmeriCorps and CCC, so working on national service projects around the country. And then got started in oceanography at Montclair State University in New Jersey, where I had the opportunity to sail down to Antarctica to collect sediment cores, and found that I really, really loved that opportunity and that research experience. So I I stuck with it and came to Oregon State to go to graduate school because they had a great program here to work on sediment cores from throughout the world. And now I'm a postdoc which is a position that you take often after you finish your PhD at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography down at the University of California in San Diego. Through this time, through my time in graduate school and as a postdoc, I've spent a lot of time at sea now collecting sediments from all over the world, from around Antarctica to the Arctic Ocean to around Greenland and in the Indian Ocean. So I am pretty broad in terms of where I'd like to go. But I figured now we could talk a little bit about the fact that we learned from mud that all three of us we're all connected by this idea that we can go to the ocean and collect sediment cores and learn something new about Earth from them.
So this movie that you're seeing, it's showing the A-frame on the stern of a ship coming up, and that pendant that you can see dangling down, that is a simple kind of sediment core called a gravity core. Might actually be a casting core, but a casting core. And a casting core is it's a kind of gravity core. A casting core is a square gravity core. But what we do is we go to sea and we collect these samples, and we're going to try and explain to you why we do that.
Yeah, and so this place is just off of Antarctica. But now we'll go up to North Greenland, and hopefully you'll be able to see this video okay. What we're showing you here is this is a piston coring operation. And so they're deploying the piston core off the stern of the ship, back of the ship. And this is north of Greenland, so that's why all that sea ice is there. And when the core comes back up, you pull it out in this plastic liner, and you can see Paul here pointing to the bottom of that core where you see mud and rocks. Here's another coring technician, Chris, who's looking at the core cutter. That's what actually cuts into the sediment. And then after the core is recovered, we can, while we're on the ship, we can bring it to our labs and do all sorts of stuff with it, split it open and take a look outside. You can see Mo there taking the first look at that core. And then we bring them into the lab and we can describe the cores, and we can stand around and talk and discuss what we think is going on in the core. And so this is everything from describing the color of the core, the sedimentary structures that are in the core. This is a scientist named Lawrence, and this is Anne, who are describing the cores right now. And then Anne's taking a look at what's actually in the core. And we'll get back to this in a little bit, but she's looking at a little fossil of an animal called the Foraminifera, which is a zooplankton. So it's an animal that eats other animals.
Zooplankton are protists, or sorry, not zooplankton, but Foraminifera are actually they're protists. They're their own class of life, which is kind of interesting. They're somewhere between an animal and a plant. Some of them are symbiotic.
But they make these little shells and they get deposited on the seafloor, and they're really important to us. We do a lot of work with these Foraminifera. So when the core is on the deck, this is an example of that. It might be that same casting core that we were looking at earlier. This is off of Antarctica. We can split the core open and take a look at it. And so one of the fundamental things about sediment cores is just like tree rings or ice cores or is we can look back through time the further down the sequence we go. So up at the top of the core, there's Bruce, and Bruce is looking at recent time. So he's looking at the core top. Those are the most recent sediments. But if you move further down the core, you can see Sani, and she's looking further in the past, further back in time.
So what makes sediment such a wonderful archive for these kinds of studies is that as the sediments are accumulating in the bottom of the ocean, in many places they're accumulating undisturbed, and so they just accumulate over thousands or tens of thousands or millions of years. And then when you take a plug through them, just like if you took a straw through a layer cake and put your thumb over the top of the straw and pulled out a piece of the layer cake, when we pull out a piece of the sediment column, as what Brendan is trying to show here is that you can move basically backwards through that history from the most recent sediments all the way to the more distant past. And with the proxies, with the animals and the plants and the chemistry that's being incorporated in these sediments, we can then reconstruct all kinds of interesting things about the past environment, including how productive the fisheries were, how warm the ocean was, how much regional fresh water was coming in. There's all kinds of important information that's being stored in this mud.
Yeah, and so sometimes we can think of that a little bit more in terms of outcrops or rocks that are at the surface. So here's a place that's close to me in San Diego that has a bunch of layers in the rocks. And so the study of the layers of the rocks is called stratigraphy. So we could take this outcrop and move up and down it and learn about Earth history based on the layers of the rocks that are present. And when we go out to sea, though, we can't always see what these sequences or these outcrops look like. So we can use something called seismic stratigraphy, or using sound to image the sediments. And so here we're making a big noise in the water column. It sends a sound wave down to the seafloor, and based on how that sound wave bounces back, it tells us about what we're looking at. So if you look on the computer screen that Ben and Mo are looking at here, you can see all the layers of the sediment that we're about to go and try to get a core from. When the cores come back up, we have people on our team that work on the geophysical properties of the core, or using various sensors to tell us about the sediment properties. And so here are two students, Anna and Iris. The last time we were in Oceanus, running a core through what we call the multisensor track, or just a collection of sensors that tells us about sediment properties.
This information can help us correlate cores that are taken from different locations, so we can look for changes that happen at the same time in the density or in the magnetic mineral content of the core, and then we can tie those together and know that we are looking at the same depositional horizon, or the same moment in time preserved in two different sites. It's a very useful tool.
One of the other things that we'll do is we'll look at, like we were talking about earlier, what fossils are present in the core. And so those Foraminifera create fossils. This is a scientist named Yuji, and he studies the fossils of a tiny plant called a diatom. They create little shells out of glass, and then the glass gets preserved on the seafloor, and that tells us about past oceanographic conditions. Because you can imagine, if things get warmer or colder or saltier or fresher, the things that are living in the ocean are going to change based on what preference they have. So we can learn about the past by looking at the fossils.
The same way that if you found a fossil on land of a palm leaf, you might think, okay, this environment when this fossil was preserved was probably pretty warm. Versus if you found a fossil of a cactus spine, you might think, well, maybe it was pretty dry. Versus finding a fossil of a high latitude or an alpine pine tree, then you would think, okay, well, it probably was pretty cold and maybe snowy. And the same thing is happening in the marine environment. There's different species of these different very tiny animals and plants that prefer different kinds of habitats, and we know about their modern distribution, so we know which ones are found in very warm waters or very salty waters or very fresh waters today. And so then when we look back in time down in a sediment core and we find the abundance of these different types of organisms changing, then we can say, okay, back before people were here to see anything, back before there were any instruments or any satellites recording what was happening, we know from the kinds of organisms that are being preserved in this mud that it was colder here back then. Or we know from the kinds of organisms that are being preserved in this mud, even though no one's around to see it, we know that it must have been a lot drier, or maybe the productivity was, there must have been more nutrients in the ocean and a higher productivity. And so this is the kind of information that we get from these cores that's so important for understanding the natural context of our climate.
And I just wanted to show a couple people too that we work with, or that we've worked with in the past, that aren't necessarily on the direct science side. We can't do any of this oceanography work without a whole team of people behind us to support us. And so that includes the people that make the ship run, from the captain to the engineers. This man here is named Ian. He's an engineer on the JOIDES Resolution, which is a drill ship, an academic drill ship. and helps keep our ship running. But you know, this goes to the captain, the mates, the people that work on the deck. There are also a lot of people that work as marine technicians that help support our science, and so they work sometimes as the people between us as scientists and the ship's crew. Sometimes they also just help with logistics or as an extra hand, or just to make the science happen. And so here's Lulu, and she's a technician on the Jody's Resolution, that same ship. And of course, we just want to give another call out to Paul. Paul is a coring technician. He's going to be coming out with us in the next couple of weeks when we go off the Oregon margin of Oceanus. And he's really the world expert in sampling the seafloor.
The facility that that Paul runs out of Oregon State is the last of its kind in the U.S. and it's an internationally recognized repository of knowledge and expertise in this very specialized field. But as Brendan says, we couldn't do any of this without the technicians and the engineers, and probably for every scientist, there are 4 or 5 technicians and ship's crew who are working really, really hard to make all of the conditions possible for this kind of work to occur. So it's really a communal enterprise.
Yeah, and then what's also kind of neat about Oregon State as well, as since we're talking about Oregon State as being a center for this kind of work, collecting sediment cores and doing work on sediment cores. OSU has the largest sediment core collection on the west coast of the U.S., and it's one of the biggest in the world as well. This is Maisie. She works at OSU as the sediment core curator, and this is part of the collection here. She's in a refrigerator with all these cores. And so you can see it's almost like a library of sediment cores. So if you're interested in what's on the seafloor anywhere in the world, you could go talk to Maisie and she could probably help you figure that out.
So the sediment cores, it's fairly complicated to organize these expeditions, and a lot of times they go to places where it's very hard to get. Some of the photographs that Brendan has shown you earlier with the work that we're doing off of Greenland or Antarctica, it's really hard to get there. And so when we go to the effort of collecting a long sediment record, we preserve it, we save it, and there might be analyses that we have no idea how to do today that scientists 10 years from now will be able to look at to tell us new information about these environments. And so anytime a core is collected, after the first work is done, it gets stored in one of these core libraries, and then we have people like Maisie, these core librarians who help connect researchers 10, 20, 50 years in the future with the cores that they need to answer the questions they have about our past environments, ranging from how frequent were earthquakes on the Oregon margin to how big did the ice sheets get around Antarctica during the last warm period. There's all kinds of wonderful questions you can answer with mud.
Well, there was like that. Don't forget, we helped that guy with the stellar explosion thing, which is completely out of the field of oceanography, really. But
that's a good point. We've been focusing on oceanography, but we actually did recently do some work with an astrophysicist who was looking for exotic elements that are produced by a supernova. And so he went to this, he found sediment cores that were collected in the 50s and 60s, mostly around Antarctica. And when the people who collected these cores from the El Tanin, a ship that's been decommissioned for 40 years, they would have had no idea that one day we would have particle accelerators capable of detecting these elemental byproducts of these kinds of supernovae. And so because those cores were saved, and those cores are now at Oregon State University, these nuclear physicists and astrophysicists were able to reconstruct the timeline of a supernova that happened 1 billion years ago.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that. That's really cool. So that leads us into what we're about to go out and do. So on July 7th, we're going to leave Newport, Oregon to collect a bunch of sediment cores from off the Oregon margin. It's an expedition that we're calling the Cascadia Hops Expedition. And so if you look at our logo, each one of these letters represents one of the many things that we're looking at. So the H represents ice sheets. It has the little icicles on it. The O is actually one of these fossil Foraminifera. It's a peregrina. And And that's going to tell us about past ocean changes. That's one of the fossils that we'll be looking for past ocean changes. The B represents the geomagnetic field. We can use sediment cores to learn about the history of the geomagnetic field. And the S is a river, and it's because we're interested in if we can learn more about the discharge of the Columbia River on all sorts of timescales, and what that tells us about past snowpack, changes in the ice sheets that were here during the last ice age, and the amount of precipitation the Pacific Northwest was receiving. So if you're interested in learning more about this expedition, we have a website that you can go to. It's kind of long, but if you go to the CSI Career Day website, there's a link to it there, where you can find out all sorts of information about what we're doing and how to follow along with us. And even how to talk to us while we're out at sea, if you have questions while we're out at sea. And just to finish up before we do some questions from you guys, I was just going to show you a map of where we're going to go. So you can see here, down on we're looking at the Oregon and Washington coastline, the offshore in the ocean. We're looking at what the seafloor looks like. So the lighter colors represent shallower water depths, and the darker colors represent deeper water depths. And then the red line, the red-orange line between the yellow dots is going to be our cruise track. So we'll steam from Newport, Oregon to our first station. We'll take a sediment core, then we'll go to our next station, take another sediment core. On the right side of the screen, you can see an X-ray image of a core that we took in 2017, which will be pretty similar to the kinds of cores that we're targeting on this expedition, and just how different some of the sediments look like in that same core. And so that tells us that there were big changes in the past in terms of the environmental conditions.
This core spans about 20,000 years to give you a sense of time. So the lowermost section, the one that's labeled D, the deep glacial, that's spanning a period from about 18,000 to about 12,000 years ago. So this is a period during which those big ice sheets of the Northern Hemisphere, our local one was the Cordilleran ice sheet, and it was over Seattle. It occupied all of the lowlands. It extended into eastern Washington and into western Montana. So when that ice sheet was retreating, that D section is what would be considered the deep glacial. And then at around 12,000 years ago, we move into a period of more stable climate, which would be the Holocene.
Yeah, and that's pretty old. To put that in perspective, you know, that's way older than the age of when the first people came to North America by a few thousand years. So it's, you know, this is really ancient history that we're looking at.
In fact, so the first Americans to cross over the Bering Land Bridge were probably crossing over as this ice was retreating. That would have created the passageway for them along the coast to allow them to migrate south and populate the Americas. So it's actually, there's a really tight coupling in the past as well as in the present between the environment and human society. So in the early Holocene, this is a really interesting period. This is panel C. Hopefully everybody can see those teeny tiny bands, those really fine bands. So these teeny tiny bands in C, they're very faint relative to the bands in D. They have a different origin. So the bands in D are from recurring big floods from ice-dammed lakes that were happening over in eastern Washington and western Montana. They were floods, we believe, based on the timing from Glacial Lake Missoula, which you may have heard of. This is the flooding that scoured out the channeled scablands of eastern Oregon in the Columbia Gorge. But in the early Holocene, there were no ice-dammed lakes. There weren't humongous changes in sediment supply. And the sedimentation rates are a lot lower. And there's two ways to preserve structure in the seafloor. Basically, like once sediment is deposited in the seafloor, biology wants to mix it up. So if you look at panel B, the late Holocene or the modern Holocene, you can see everything is kind of modeled together. You don't see any layers. And that's because worms and sea urchins and shrimp and all kinds of little critters are wiggling through the upper 10 centimeters of sediment or so, and mixing all the layers together. There's the two ways to preserve layers in the sediment are through having very, very rapid accumulation. That's what's happening in section D. The sediment's being deposited so fast that upper surface where the animals are living is moving up before they can destroy all the structure. The other way to get that in section C is having low bottom water oxygen. And I'm going to let Brendan talk to you about that for a minute, because my new little 4-year-old boy, he just turned 4 years old a couple of weeks ago, needs my attention.
Yeah, so just to finish up with what Mo was saying, it's an indicator that there was a big difference in the ocean back around 8 to 10,000 years ago, and that part of that difference was that there was a lot lower oxygen concentrations, and we don't know why that is yet. And so that's one of the things that we're going to go out. One of the many things we're going to go out and look to see if we can learn about. So with that, I think we could probably do some questions. Maybe I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Hold on, Brendan, real quick before you turn that screen off. I just wanted to clarify something on that image.
Yeah.
If that's not too much of an issue.
Yeah, are we back?
You've started screen. Yes, there we go. Okay, so just to clarify for our viewers, if you were to take B, C, and D and pile them on top of each other to create that core, right? This visual has divided them into sections, right?
Mm-hmm.
So B is younger. So if you put B on top, then you have C below that, and then D at the bottom, right? So if our viewers can view this core, this has been sliced up, if you will.
That's right.
Is that
yeah,
correct?
so actually the whole core is about 30 feet in length. And so these are just small little segments of the core that we're showing here. But that's right. So the core would stack on top of each other. And as you move back from B to C to D, you're going youngest to sort of middle age to then the oldest sediment that we recovered at that site.
Great. Just wanted to clarify that for our viewers.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay.
That's a great
Sure thing. Okay. Well, fantastic. Thank you for that presentation and for the insights into what it takes, the different roles people can play when conducting research at sea. So Brenda, you can go ahead and turn your video back on. Awesome. Great. You read my mind. So yeah, it's just great to see the different roles people can play to make this happen and what you're researching. So participants, go ahead and enter your questions into that Q&A box. And we're going to go ahead and see if we can get to as many as we can. We have a question about how long are you on the boat while taking samples? So I'm wondering if this is how long is your expedition? And then maybe how long does it take to take samples? Maybe I can divide that up.
Well, so this upcoming expedition, we'll be out to sea for a week, which is on the shorter side for these kinds of expeditions. The longest I've been out on a ship for has been for 2 months. Paul, how about you? What's the longest you've been out on a ship for?
Oh, less than 2 months. The big boats that I go out on, are not nearly the size of the Joides, and their range is about 50 days. So I've done, somewhere in the mid 40s for days at sea. The other question is, how long does it actually take to take a core? We generally run our wire speeds for our larger cores at about 40 meters a minute. So in 800 meters of water, it would take about 20 minutes to get to the bottom. 20 minutes to get it back. So, you could probably get a core in about an hour. Some of our smaller cores we run with a smaller diameter wire, and so you can actually run those winches up to like 100 meters a minute. So quite a bit faster. So.
Very good. Thanks for clarifying, Paul. Okay, so how many people will be going on the expedition? And how, I'm gonna add something to this question, and how does COVID impact that? So maybe how many people normally go, and is that different because of COVID?
You want to answer that one?
So the number of scientists that go on an expedition varies depending on what they're trying to do and how big the ship is. So the Oceanus, the ship that OSU runs, our largest vessel, can hold a science party of somewhere approaching 20 people, a little bit less. But then there's also the crew of the ship, the engineers, the captain, the first mate. There are cooks, there are technicians that sail. And so when you account for all the bodies on board, you're looking at somewhere between maybe 30 to 40 people on the Oceanus. Depending on and that would be if you had the berthing fan, so maybe a little bit less than that. But on a ship like the Georgi's Resolution, there are dozens of people, a science party of probably 3 dozen people. And then you also have twice that many technicians and crew and what they call roughnecks who are working the drilling rig. So for the big oceanographic expeditions, the science party can be close to 100 people, if not slightly more. COVID has actually impacted that quite a bit. For this cruise, for example, our original science party, I think, would have been somewhere around 18 people, including technicians. And now our science party is down to 8. So we weren't able to bring the students to sea with us that we were hoping to bring to sea. And that's been really challenging, because a large part of the reason that we go out there is to help our students learn how to do this work and to give them that experience of going to sea, and to sort of instill in them this passion for this kind of science. And we're trying our best to involve them remotely and also keep everyone safe. That's part of the reason that we're doing these outreach webinars. And if you follow along through the website that Brendan shared the link to, you can actually follow along a lot of the same way that many of our students who will be working with the samples will be following along. So we're going to have updates about where the ship is. You'll be able to find links that let you look at the deck cameras and see what's happening on the deck. And we're also trying to have a open chat going throughout the cruise where people can send us questions and we can respond back as fast as possible to keep them abreast of what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Fantastic, thanks, Mo. And when you say students, this is to clarify the graduates or students in the College of Earth and Ocean Atmospheric Sciences. Are those the students you're referring to?
Students in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. We also were taking along, we were planning on taking along several research experience for undergraduate students. So the Research Experience for Undergraduates program, it's a national program. OSU is one of the centers that hosts them. And it allows, you can have an RE, they're called REU students, Research Experience for Undergraduate. You can have an REU at your own institution. So we do sometimes get REUs, excellent REUs that are also OSU students. But they do encourage you to apply for institutions that aren't your home institution. So we frequently work with students from other institutions. And this is a way, particularly for students who wouldn't otherwise have access to the infrastructure of a big R1 university like OSU. It lets us bring students in from smaller, really good teaching colleges, but colleges that maybe don't have the same kind of instruments or the same kind of, like they wouldn't have a ship, for example. So we had several students that were supposed to sail with us from Western Washington University on this cruise, and they'll be participating and following along and contributing to the science from shore. And then they'll work on those samples through their senior year and into an REU next summer.
Very cool. Thanks for clarifying. I just wanted to clarify for our viewers that there are different ways to get involved. And so something to consider in your, if you decide to go to college, the Research Experience for Undergraduates is something to consider to broaden that breadth of experience. So thanks for clarifying.
If I could chime in there, though, I just encourage it. If you are interested in this kind of work, you don't have to wait for a program like the Research Experience for Undergraduate. Just go talk to a professor that does this kind of work, or a graduate student or a postdoc that does this kind of work, and almost always will be excited to get you involved and give you a research project. There's a lot of work to do. So that'd be my advice to you if you were interested in this sort of stuff, is just try to talk to someone who does it and see how you can get involved.
That's absolutely true.
Always good to be reminded of that, for sure. And we definitely have some middle schoolers on here, so there are, maybe some other things that the middle schoolers can do to get exposed.
I wanted to emphasize that Paul mentioned that he was part of the Ocean Sciences Bowl.
Yes.
And that was that's a high school competition, the National Ocean Sciences Bowl. The one that's hosted in Oregon is called Salmon Bowl. The one in Washington is called Orca Bowl. But these ocean sciences teams, a lot of high schools have them. If your high school has one, check it out. If your high school doesn't have one, talk to your science teacher, your biology teacher about starting one. These are great, really fun competitions, and they get you exposed to a bunch of different faculty, potential people that you might be interested in working with. It's a really fun way to learn more about a STEM field in natural sciences.
Very good. Thank you for the plug for the National Ocean Science Bowl program. Fantastic. So I have one more quick question. Thank you, friends, for sticking out with us a little late here. I know we're at 4:46, but I just wanted to ask this one question from Kristen. What's the coolest animal that you found in a core?
You remember that that like weird like Echinoderm type thing that we found in Greenland in the floor?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was, yeah, I do remember.
So we collected a multi-core off of Greenland in an area that's very, very rarely visited by people. And the multi-core came back up and it had this like long skinny stalk in it. It looked like something out of a doctor's suit. At the top there was this beautiful tuft of feathers. And it was some kind of Echinoderm. I think it must have been related to like a sea star or sea urchin.
Yeah.
But it had like a long tall stalk. It looked almost like some underwater palm tree, but it was an animal. It was absolutely beautiful.
That's cool. Yeah, Paul, how often do you find stuff like that? I mean, you take the most cores of any of us.
Well, you know, I've gotten those ratfish. You could Google those. I don't know what the actual science name is, but they're you know, we've got those in multi-core, so little live fish swimming around that we collected from, you know, 3,000 meters deep, like 10,000 feet of water. We've gotten those fairly routinely. Crabs are pretty routine. Sometimes we get clams. Sometimes we get krill. One of the coolest things I've ever brought back was that giant shark tooth, like the size of my hand in a box core.
It's now, we have a
obviously.
megalodon tooth on display at the repository, but this is a tooth that came back in a core from a shark that was the size of a school bus.
Wow, that's impressive. All right, so you can find some pretty cool things in these cores is what it boils down to. All right, so thank you so much to Mo and Brendan and Paul for giving us some insights into what they'll be doing next July and what they'll be learning from taking cores from deep in the ocean. I'm gonna go ahead and multitask real quick and share my screen. All right, so thank you again for that wonderful presentation. Before you go, folks, we want you to fill out a quick survey. Kate's gonna go ahead and drop that link or the links for the survey and our Career Day website into our chat. If you were, you may have noticed also that as we were talking, the OSU repository that was referred to, the link to that is in our chat box. The National Ocean Science Program, Science Bowl program information is in our chat box. So before you leave, check out that chat box, or you can save that chat box so you can have some of those critical links, including the link to follow along next month. So check out the chat box for those links as resources. And so fill out that survey, give us your feedback. That would be great. And we're also very excited that all of our previous webinars, except for this one, are available on our Career Day website. So make sure you go and check out that Career Day website and tune into those webinars that you missed. They are organized by theme. They're listed here for you to check out. Maybe pinpoint some of those. If you're a marine mammal lover, there's a couple of marine mammal focused ones listed here, etc. So go ahead and view those on our website. You can also keep an eye on that same Career Day website for updates for future webinars. While this is the last Careers in Science webinar of this season, before summer break, we do hope to bring this series back for the fall. So keep an eye on that website for updates. And we again want to thank our presenters, and we want to thank you for joining us. And so this concludes our Career in Science webinar for today. And so we hope to see you next fall at one of our future events. And we wish you a very safe and fun summer. Thank you, everyone.